the Christians I met who have grown up in a household where questions were not off limits, and that's how we run our household. No questions off limits. You might get disagreement, but you'll never get actual judgment. You will get disagreement, depending on what it is you say, but you won't get judgment. We'll walk through this together, and we'll think through these things together. Those Christians that I've met have tended to have more robust faiths, especially when the challenges come. It's very much like when my first child was born, when my boy was born, the doctor said, get him outside. He was born in the summer. He said, get him outside as soon as you can. And as soon as it's safe, here's when you get him outside, so that he gets exposed to the pollens and the whatever's in the world, because now is when he's going to develop that immunity and that ability to cope with stresses on his body. And the earlier he does that, the better off you are, as long as you do it in a safe way. And I think that's a similar thing with the Christian faith. If you insulate people to the point where you think the only way you can actually believe is to have this isolation and this insulation from the world around you, suggests that we're trying to hide you from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world's trying to knock the faith out of you. And by the way, they're going to do a good job of it. So we're terrified to expose you to this kind of thing. And so you get out there and all of a sudden you find out you have all of these spiritual allergens coming at you, and they become carcinogen. In one sense to your faith. And then before you know it, you're gone. There's that phrase I once heard, if you scratch hard enough at the surface of an atheist, you might find a fundamentalist underneath. A lot of times former fundamentalists can become like that. The world, I mean, people who think the Bible dropped out of the sky that way, and who don't have this history behind the canonization of Scripture, for example, or a full understanding of inerrancy, have this almost cartoonish way to do it. And then they suddenly see all these arguments. There's actually counter arguments to this, but there's always been counter arguments. This is not new. The specialists that Red is referring to are not new specialists. These are just new people making old arguments that have been responded to for quite some time. Now they might be doing it in new ways, but the reality is that if you expose yourself to these kinds of claims and counter arguments of the Christian faith, don't be afraid to do that, because there are responses to that. And in fact, there are. And he graciously mentioned that there were Christians he was reading, but he was reading only them. And so I don't know him, and I've never talked to him, but it seems to me that a real possibility exists that while he had read some of the experts who came from a Christian perspective, at the time he was doing that, it's like the only experts who were really talking about this with any credibility happened to be Christians. And so when he exposed to a wider world, we're like, oh my goodness, there are other actual PhDs who know what they're talking about, who don't agree. Why have you been hiding this from me? Now, he didn't say those words, but I could easily see that. In fact, I'm going to tell you, not only could I easily see it, I've actually been across the table from people who've had literally that reaction. It's like, if this was such a good case, why did they hide this from me for so long? And that does as much damage to our witness as exposing them to these things only. Hiding it from them could be really, really damaging. So we have to make sure the Christian faith, if it's worth believing, will stand up to scrutiny. And I think that's a good point you make.
Yeah, and I think another lesson there too. And then I know we need to move on. But another lesson there too is if you create a caricature of the people who would disagree with you, like they lean on their own understanding, they're trying to rip your faith from you. Then you meet them and they're not trying to do those things. They're not leaning on their own understanding. In that sense, they're actually thoughtful, rational, looking at evidence of this or that, and they're kind and things like that. Even though it changes nothing about the content that you're looking at, it makes it look like you've been lying, or you don't actually. Now, there's something that has not been true in your past. And so just by their sort of bare minimum human decency, it seems like they are more truthful. You could have two experts saying the same thing. This one's more truthful because he's the scientist who is kind and rational and those sorts of things.
Well, and by the way, that shattering of a stereotype that can maybe set us on a different path is also true for the Christian. Right now, I mean, to quote my friend Danny Bannister, people often think that Christians are mad, bad, and dangerous. And so they come across one who's not so crazy, who's not a bad person and not dangerous. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, Christians don't think the way that I've never met Christians who think this way, who are as thoughtful as you. You can actually reverse that stereotype as well.
Yeah.
So in other words, the whole point is get to know people and expose yourself to as much of the outside world that is, while also maintaining a grounding in the Christian faith at the right time. I don't think it's the time for an infant Christian or a baby Christian to get just deluged with Dawkins, Dennett, Harris, all these folks. But there comes a time when you're supposed to be exposed to the outside world. And I think it will actually increase your faith. And you'll find out that the experts, while maybe a consensus by secular standards, aren't necessarily the most powerful arguments, which is part of what we wanted to get to today, is that consensus doesn't always mean right.
Yeah. Exactly.